Ready to go?
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, we're short.
But certainly more than a quorum. Okay, I will, I'm out of practice.
You know how to work it.
Let's see. Si, can you hear me on this microphone?
I don't think it's on, so I'm not
Yes, I
hearing it.
can.
Okay,
Is it on?
I guess so.
Did you have a little light on it? I
Yeah.
can't even hear
You
you.
have to get right up close to it, move right up your mouth.
You gotta come really close.
The easy sounds of Albany, Oregon. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, that's my 3 a.m. voice. Anyway, so it's my real joy to call the meeting to order, just 4 minutes tardy. And so away we go. We'll start with the roll call.
Member Smith,
Present.
Olson,
Here.
Novak,
Here.
Bartholomew,
Here.
Kosinski,
Here.
Alex Johnson II,
Here.
Bessie Johnson,
Here.
Spence,
Here.
Collins,
Collins is excused.
Allen,
You get it, yeah?
Riles,
Present. Present.
Settlemeyer,
Here.
Larson,
Here.
Gray. Thank you.
Okay. That's a sufficient number of people to hold a meeting. Can I see that agenda? This is for today. Okay. Call to order, roll call. Approval of minutes. Anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes as currently placed before us?
I move to approve the minutes of the board.
There's a second.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, vote that by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Okay, so minutes have passed.
Could we have an agenda on the screen so the chairman can see the agenda?
Right, he's got two right here.
Well, this is mine. Here's the agenda.
Okay. Okay, thank you, folks. So business from the public. Persons wanting to provide comments may email written comments to Sophie Diecast, including your name before noon on the day of the meeting. Comment virtually during the meeting, register by emailing before noon on the day of the meeting. With your name, the chair will call upon those who have registered to speak. Appear in person at the meeting and register to speak. Sophie, do you have a list of names or a?
No, there was one item that was emailed to you all, and no one was signed up.
Okay. Okay, just great. So, number 5, start with the great ghost of CARA, Wells Fargo building discussion.
Great ghost, I don't like that, it's only been a few years, but I'd say that St. Francis has been the great ghost, and that's on its way. Thank you, Chair Spence. So the purpose of discussing this item with the CARA Board this evening was an invitation from the ARA to the CARA Board to think a little bit about the future of that property and hopefully make some recommendations about which track the ARA should pursue with that property. I was reminiscing a little bit the other day about the history of that project and how we got hold of it and negotiated a purchase of that property. Mark, I remember sitting next to you, and it was a difficult 6 months or so negotiation to purchase that building. The ARA and the CARA group was decisive in wanting to purchase that because there was a shared understanding of its value to the downtown revitalization efforts. Both in the service parking that was there and then a reuse of that building, an active and vital use of that space. So we got clear direction, better buy that building, not lose it. So it was a stressful few months, but we were successful in purchasing it, thankfully. The express goal of purchasing that property was to really have some time in finding an entity that could revitalize it. You know, sometimes the community groups in the public sector can find itself saying, we wish something to happen at a property, but unless you've got some levers to pull or some buttons to push, it's not always likely that your wish aligns with, you know, what happens there. That happens regularly. So with the purchase, you have the levers and the buttons. And the idea was to revitalize that in line with the CARA goals. And so I put in the staff memo for you just as a reminder, the primary goal of the CARA district, and that is to increase the economic vitality of the area, encourage the use of vacant and underused land and buildings, and rehabilitate structures while increasing property values both in CARA and the city of Albany. And that's certainly been the trend thus far. So I don't need to rehash the last few years of history of that project, except to say there was a strong desire to hold true to that use. There was an aversion to it turning into some sort of government use or non-vital commercial, retail, residential use. So there was a number of iterations that were considered for what to do with that property. Ultimately, again, I won't go through all this, but landed on a group of people which evolved over time, but trying to add some residential density as well as new retail and commercial use on the first floor. What we learned in working with that grading group, unfortunately, is that the cost and technicality of going, I call it north sometimes, going up on that property is immense. And even with their ability to absorb grant dollars, public grant dollars, to $2 million, without a tax burden the way many other private owners of the property would experience, it was still not possible to make going vertical on that property pencil. And part of that comes from mating the old building with the new building. It's technically challenging and in today's environment quite expensive. So I say that all because I think we collectively learned something about the potential of that property, particularly to provide residential density in its current form. So I had a note here that said, given the current building environment, additional costs for a product, meaning increased residential density, that could be built for less from ground up may not make sense, and I stand by that. So let me share my screen with you. Yeah, just a minute. Let's see if okay. Oh, you know what? I'm actually sharing the wrong screen. Just a minute here. Let me try this one more time. Pardon. Okay, this is what I wanted to share. Okay, you want to do this one? Okay, so I think in summary, there's really two, I don't know if it's still showing up, but there's still two options. One is to look for a buyer to reuse the property as is. And you might recall that actually some of the renderings we saw, you know, the dark colored paints and new lighting and maybe some vines growing up the side, it's not a terrible building really. There's actually some charm to it, some really usable value. It's bomb-proof, quite literally. Has a good roof to it. The infrastructure on it's pretty good. There is very little in terms of environmental remediation that needs to happen. I'm talking about asbestos and lead. There's really very little of that. We've done lots of investigation on it. So I think it's highly likely that someone could reuse the building as is. The other option is if density is a priority, adding residential units, which we know is a real goal and need for this downtown, eventually in one place or another. If that's the desire, in my estimation, leveling the building and going from the ground up is the way to achieve that. Ground up construction is cheaper in this case than it is trying to reuse the existing building, and it allows for a wider variety of interested developers to build in that fashion. And that still allows some preservation of current parking as well. You might recall that the parking is integral to two properties, to the Wells and the St. Francis, and in fact, when we were working on a development agreement with the St. Francis and Mr. Levin and his team, even for them to get financing for a residential project, we had to have parking attached to it. There's no requirement for downtown parking per code, But in reality, people need parking, at least at this day and age, and so we had to do some long-term leases for some of those parking spots, not all of them, but some of them, in order for them to work out financing. So, with that being said, there's two options on the table, and I turn the time back to you to discuss that a little bit and think about the priority of residential density or reuse of the existing building. This is not the last project that would increase residential density in the downtown core, I'm sure of that. But it is one of them, and it's a key piece of property. So, Chair, I'll turn the time back to you.
I don't know it's necessarily my privilege to be able to ask a question initially off of this.
Need to talk into the sides.
Okay, you hear me now? All right. Sort of two issues that come to mind. One is demolition would allow building out that block, which in a sense, the opposite side of between Broad Albert and Ferry, one side of the street looks lovely, but it's kind of a dead block because there's really no foot traffic between what's now a vacant building and the next intersection, which is a dilapidated building. And so I'm also wondering, is CARA staff considering doing trying to create sort of basically a completely level construction site that CARA would handle the deconstruction?
Sure. You know, no decision obviously been made on that because there's been no direction given on whether to raise it or not. By raise it, I mean level it. One way I thought about saying it is to go up, we gotta go down. But that's something that we can easily take care of. Demolition is not a particularly complicated thing there. It's a non-contributing historic structure. It's as simple as any other demolition in the city. And costs typically range between $4 and $8 per square foot to demolish it. I have not done an appraisal or an estimate recently on that property for this purpose, but we can certainly do that if it's the will, ultimately, the ARA board to do it. But I would suggest that taking it down, having a clean slate of land to market is probably the most reasonable thing to do versus putting that additional burden on a new buyer. It increases time to market and the ability to build, which is always a benefit when it comes to development.
So is it okay if we discuss? Can we discuss this? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you're the chair.
Well, you're the chair.
Yes,
the chair, I mean,
no,
it's like, I think a lot of people want to talk about it.
I recognize Mr. Riles. Please
So
proceed.
this is a building that I had a great deal to do with. Working with the previous awardee, I've been inside that building up and down and thought about it structurally and know more about it than I really want to know. But it's something I've been doing, working on large projects for 40 years. And my look at it, the first thing is that Seth just said that it's non-contributing, but it's, and maybe Cameron could back me up on this, it is 2 years shy of 50 years in which it might become a contributing modernist building. So we run the risk of this running past 50 years and being historic the way it is. Right now it's not historic because it's, and I would just say from being inside the building, seeing some of the demo, there is some of the original building that was there was amazing, beautiful, fantastic. Very, very little of it remains. And Cameron will have his opinion on this, but here's how I would look at it as a developer, or as the developers I know would look at it. When you look at that building, there are so many unknowns and so many risks and so many issues you have to resolve. Maybe it's feasible to do, but there are a lot of risks. If you demo the building and you level that site, and let's say CARA does this, they put in money and get that cleaned up. Someone, Mark Manley was saying, hey, can you help me just take care of all the impediments to the redevelopment? Then I think it would be very, very much more easy to get a number of developers in there to work on a clean site and build whatever we want. Right now, if you use it the way it is, I don't know if you're going to get the money you have invested in it. But if you invest a little more and level the site, you'd get a lot of developers, in my opinion, who would say, hey, well, I know how to do that. You know, I just build the buildings I build all the time. Tom was courageous in offering to do that. He spent well over $100,000 in engineering, design research, and to see if it was possible to do. And with escalating costs and everything else, it just became too much risk to go for. So it's my professional opinion that if you really want to optimize the value there, you probably have to do something about that building. And we don't have a lot of time to do it. Theoretically, next year it becomes 50 years old, and by national law, it's now historic, the way it is. Because the remodel of it was 50 years ago. 1973, they tore the old building down and reclad it. I met the architect that did it. They thought differently in those days. They tore apart an incredibly beautiful building and put that there. And we run the risk of that becoming historic and being stuck with it.
Yes.
I think the term that I think many of the folks here in the room probably would recognize is shovel-ready. That's used across the state and the nation when people are trying to attract businesses. You've got a shovel-ready site, like we have the old property out there on Ellingson, that is, multiple acres that are now shovel-ready. In general, that is a big advantage to have someone have that ready to go for a developer, and I think that would be an advantage. So I wholeheartedly agree with Bill that would be another opportunity for us to do, to take the building down, make it shovel ready for
Mr. Sedmeyer, and then.
So one question I have is, I have seen the interior of the building, there's not a lot of work fabric visible that I saw outside the basement. But is there any historic material underneath the Google cladding still underneath that? Is there a way we can determine that before we tear the building down?
So we looked into that in great depth. The problem becomes structural. So in 1973, the entire structure was changed. It would be a different structural system, lateral, and the outside panels are precast and brought in and welded up, and they're not a building structure. If you pull those away, they're all indications that you will find some of the original fabric under there, but it will be non-structural. And so it's a dilemma. It's pulling on a sweater. Once you open that, you may not be able to actually save any of the existing historic fabric without severely compromising its form and its structure. You have to literally, I'm not really even sure how it would be done. Again, if we go that option, I don't know who's going to step forward and put the money into it that's needed to redevelop it, because we're limiting its, unless we rebuild the entire 6 floors that were there before, you're limiting its market value. And so it just, you get these catch-22s. And we've tried really hard to figure out how to use that building, that every time you work your way around, well, you'd be either severely limiting yourself or it would be highly destructive.
Councilor Noah.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I just want to thank Mr. Riles for the input he just gave, because quite honestly, I am loath to see that building become historic and maybe less subject to change. Knowing what you just shared with us, I'm all for demolishing it and having the clean slate, which also for reasons that Mr. Sherry pointed out, it makes it shovel-ready and someone much more likely to attract a buyer and a developer. So I'm all in on demolition. I'm just going to say that right now, because my mind is made up that that's a wise move.
Mr. Sedmeyer.
So one thing I want to mention is, my understanding is that 50 years buildings become eligible to be on the National Register. That does not mean they are automatically on the National Register. The remodel of this building done in 72, 73.
It was done in 73. I had the original drawings, 1973, so it may not have been until 74.
Yeah, but anyway, that's outside the period of significance for the downtown district. So that doesn't mean that when it turns 50, it will automatically be on the national register.
But it's within the district, so I'm not so sure about that. Because none of the buildings in the district are actually on the register themselves, maybe a couple. But it's, I don't know, maybe you're right, but that's a gray area for me.
Yeah, my understanding is that it would not automatically go on the register when it hits 50.
Okay, actually, Mr. Sherry was,
I can just settle this for you, because I was under the same assumption that 50 years was some sort of automatic thing. I checked with our historic planning staff, but it qualifies, but it has to be a local process of nominating it. It has to have historically contributing features, which it does not. So it's actually hard to imagine a scenario where it could be a contributing historical structure in its current status, even if the city wanted to nominate it for that. So you're absolutely right. I guess the caveat is with federally owned buildings, it's a different story. At 50 years, it becomes historically contributing, but that's not the situation we're talking about right now.
thanks, it's helpful. Counselor Miller?
That actually addressed my concern. I just thought that, what, I didn't know about it becoming on the historical register or not. I just didn't want to even be, it's like when a car is considered a classic. I didn't even want it to get there, to where it's considered a classic, because in my estimation, it's ugly, super ugly. I've never liked it. Probably liked it when I was, before they changed it up when I was.
Marilyn has her hand up.
Okay, I would appreciate you go with Counselor Smith first, and then I'll go ahead.
Okay, yes, Counselor Smith, please.
Thank you. This is a technical issue. From 4 miles away, I've got a complaint about, well, a request that people speak slowly, speak directly into the microphones. Do not turn your head to the one side or the other. It's very difficult at this end to understand what's being said. It sounds like you're all at the bottom of a well. And so now I hope I never make the same mistake when I'm finally back on the dais. I'm one of the really guilty ones. But just speak slowly, enunciate clearly, and we'll hear you at the other end, and it will probably be really helpful to the staff who has to decipher this for minutes purposes later. Thank you very much. I have a comment about the building as well, but it probably is not politically correct.
Now we really want to hear it.
We're speaking to you.
Let's
our
hear it.
clearest voices, please today.
You're not on mic, sir.
I am not.
No, you have to be really up close when you're not on
Move the
mic.
mic right up to your mouth. Just move the whole
All
mic.
right.
So,
Hear your comments, Marilyn.
Well, the only thing, the most appropriate word I can think of to describe the appearance of the Wells Fargo building is Soviet. And I'll just leave it at that. I wouldn't mind seeing it come down.
Yeah, I believe the term is brutalist, is the actual term of that type of construction. So it's very nice to hear from Seth and from Cameron that they don't think it will automatically become our nightmare as a historic building. So, but it still remains that in order, it's not just that it's only one story, it's from an architectural point of view, it's really difficult to fit anything in there. It was designed as a great big bank, and that's what it works for, and I can't, really difficult to reimagine because it's heavy concrete, how you would, it's not impossible, but to make that thing work in that way is difficult.
thank you, Chair. So it sounds like to me that we have a direction. One thing I would like to know is what will the estimated value or projected value of that land would be as shovel ready? And then if we were to send off direction to come back with a quote on demo, what that process looks like, and then a timeline, because we're all on schedule, city council. We have a short cycle as far as it's going to stop raining sooner or later. It's going to start raining again in a few months. So this is like the first year I moved up here. I got here in November, it was raining, and June 23rd, it was still raining. So we're in that cycle. So I just like to tentative schedule, possible cost of that land, if it's shovel ready for a developer to come in, and what the process would look like.
And I'm happy to address that briefly right now, although I think to stay with maybe the correct process, the CARA Advisory Board make a recommendation to the ARA, and then they would give direction to staff. But as a general comment, Mayor, we can get an estimate very quickly on that, and a timeline for it as well. That shouldn't take much time at all. It's just a matter of getting someone to come take a look at it. So I feel quite confident by next month we can give you both a time and cost estimate.
So we're gonna.
And,
So, CARA meeting next month then?
well, whether that's CARA or ERA, maybe is less relevant, but we need to do that, because if the ERA is directing staff to do that, we can bring that back. It sounds like that there's been some consensus among the CARA board what they want to recommend to the ERA.
Councilor Bartholomew has got her hand up also.
Yeah, can you go off the screen so we can see the people on the screen?
Sure.
Okay. Councilor Bartholomew, please.
I could not hear the mayor. Thank you so much. I could not hear the mayor, what he was saying, but I think from Mr. Sherry's comments that he was asking for an estimate of the cost for demolition. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
because that was my question. So thank you.
I also asked for a timeline, a tentative timeline for their demolition.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll recognize myself briefly.
Mike?
I'll recognize myself briefly. The city owns it basically from the alleyway to First Avenue. That's all city property, from Wells Fargo to the end of the last parking space at the end of Ferry. So we have complete control over it.
Yeah, notwithstanding, there are some encumbrances. I think I mentioned earlier, parking leases that were required to make the St. Francis go. That being said, there was some flexibility in terms of footprint of the existing or additional structures there. We actually plan on bumping that out to encumber the current drive-through lane a little bit larger than what it is currently.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, thank you. First thing is, when the Girdings were going to build, they purchased the property. Did that not finalize, and that's why the city owns it now, is that correct?
Yeah, so the development partnership wasn't consummated in terms of sale of the property until they were going to have gone through the permitting process to make sure that we could build what they wanted to build. So it would have happened about now, probably. Of course, you know the story in the interim escalations.
Yeah, okay, great. And so, with that, I'm just really sorry that when we purchased the property that we didn't, I mean, it was in the conversation of just demolishing it at that time. All the money that's been invested in this already, you know, Girdings lost $100,000, and sometimes you spend a dime to save a penny, you know? And so I think that demolition is the best thing because, like Mr. Ross says, it's a bank. And really a lot of, I mean, if the Girdings couldn't make it work, you know that there's a problem. So I would say that we go ahead and demolish it, get it to where it's shovel ready, and let someone do something good with it.
Is that a motion, or are you waxing political?
I take it
Oh,
as a
I want more
sentiment.
discussion on
Council
it.
Olson has some.
Councilor Olson.
Yes, one good thing about old age, you were there when some of this previous stuff happened. And the bank that bought the building, they started tearing it down, and their objective was to tear the whole thing down. But they got to that first floor and they had so much trouble with it, they decided not to do it, as I recall. And so I think we have to have a cost estimate as to what it's going to cost to tear the whole thing down. And I think there's a basement we have to contend with too, don't we? Yeah. I'd like to see a cost estimate before we make a decision. Can we have that cost estimate by next month?
Councilor Olson, yeah, I think that came up earlier, and we'll engage someone to give us an estimate as soon as possible. I would expect we could have that by next month.
I'd like to suggest that we wait for that cost estimate before we make a decision to do it.
All right, not leading to a particular motion. I'm out of practice, and I'm a bit of a loss. What do I jump to now? Yes, go ahead, Seth.
So the request of the CARA board was to make a recommendation to the ARA board of what they think the future of that property should look like. So I've heard some consensus, but I'll let that go to you, whether you guys want to make a motion or there's a general consensus. I don't need to be fickle about this, but the ARA, this is the process.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to ARA that we get a cost estimate on the demolition of the Wells Fargo building as it sits, and also project the schedule for any demolition work with.
Second.
Any discussion on that?
So in answer to your question, it's not that easy to demolish that building, but it's not that bad. We thoroughly inspected the building, the amount of asbestos and stuff, and is not a real issue. It's very robust old concrete. I was involved somewhat with the demolition of the old YMCA, and we turned a lot of that concrete into fill material. It's not straightforward. It's not like just taking a big track over there and munching it down, but it can be demolished. It's not terrible, but it's not easy. I can see why back in the 70s maybe they decided not to do it, but today it wouldn't scare me to tear that down.
I do have a question about the vault. Is it still there?
Oh, yeah.
So is there salvage value in that vault?
Pardon?
Salvage value in that vault as far as?
There's different parts of the building that we would want to salvage out, and
Salvage?
there's some wonderful doors and things down in there that would be fairly easy to take out. And the old foundations and stuff we would leave in place, and we just recompacted, and the design issue would be, okay, just checking out those foundations and recompacting. It's a whole lot easier than trying to build through the building and leave that existing building intact. Whereas basically taking the building apart and filling around the foundations would be a lot more simple proposition.
Councilor Kupczynski.
Yes, I think we're just basically in a small way, kicking the can down the road. We've already agreed that that's the right way to go. We're just gonna get an estimate to make it happen. Let's just go ahead and approve it, get the estimate, make it happen. I think it's just another step to kind of delay this whole process. We've already agreed that is the right process. So let's just say it's the right process, and then we'll go on and we'll get the estimate, and away we go.
I agree with that.
And again, for process sake, the approval of that expenditure would come through the ARA before it was done either way, so.
I would like to add an addendum to sort of the motions that were presented here, and that an assessment of the value of the entire contents of the parcel that will ultimately be created by that. What would that be?
You stole my bonus edition I was gonna bring next month, because we'll do that too. So there's a way to just, without even purchasing an official appraisal, you can just talk to commercial brokers and give you an idea, multiples to kind of give you a true north on that. But we work with multiple commercial appraisers on different properties down here, and that will certainly be a part of creating an offering that we go out to the market with anyhow. So I can give you an estimate here.
I was just think of it as a cliffhanger teaser, and you really get to blow us away next time.
Sounds good.
Councilor Olson, go ahead.
My reason for thinking we ought to get a cost estimate is that there might be someone who would like to use the building as is, and that might be more profitable than doing the demolition, getting it shovel ready, whatever we're going to shovel. Hopefully it's not BS. But I would like to consider the dollars involved rather than just plunging ahead and doing it.
So I think we could figure out what the rent would be.
I think Councilor Johnson beat you with her hand.
I was just gonna say-
Hang on a second.
I believe that's what we're gonna do as far as getting costs and stuff. It's not like we're gonna go ahead and demolish it without getting all these values and costs and stuff like that. So it's not a done deal right now, but if we move in this direction, at least, Seth and, Sophie can get some bids or get some values and stuff, so. I don't think
There is a motion
we're
to
up
set on
anything,
the table.
yeah. All right, so thank you.
So I'd like to amend my, motion to include what would be to commercially rent the property.
Or some,
Do you want to elaborate on that?
No, just as far as the Council Wilson was
no,
mentioning.
I think that your motion, your original motion is fine.
Okay,
I'm just arguing against Ray's idea, that forget about costs, just go ahead and do it willy-nilly.
so I'll leave a motion in place.
I think your original motion is fine.
Has it been seconded?
Yes, Councilor Johnson.
Your amendment, so I seconded your first, did you make an amendment?
No, I withdrew it.
Yeah, I move the question.
Okay.
Can somebody read the motion and that
Yes.
we're voting on?
I was gonna ask if I could do that anyway. Okay, so the motion is to recommend to the ARA that they direct staff to get a cost estimate for the demo of the Wells Fargo building as well as a schedule. And bring it back.
A motion is second.
Yes, motion's been moved and seconded. Those in favor of it as just presented now, say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Okay.
And I abstain, join them on the list or whatever.
So one abstention from Mr. Settlemyre and one vote nay from Councilor Kuczynski. Okay. The ayes have it.
It's gonna come to us now.
You said no rate.
He wants to get rid of it now.
As we've already said, let's get this done, you know, and just delaying it until we get these estimates, because we're gonna do it. I mean, that's not an option.
I see, I thought that's kind of what we had
Yeah.
decided on, that we're gonna get the cost and then do it, you know, it's reasonable.
That's why my intention was, so.
Okay, that's what
I just want to
I,
schedule, I want to know how much it's gonna take,
yeah,
because I have to talk to folks, we all have to talk to.
You're off point, sir.
So I wanted to schedule, at least a tentative schedule, because that reporter and people around the city want to know when's it gonna happen, how long it's gonna take. That's it. So that motion passes, right?
Yes, on by an overwhelming margin. So, okay, so we have finished item 5 on the agenda. Seth, you're up for item 6.
Sure, thank you, Chair Spence. I struggled a little bit to think about how to introduce discussion on this next topic. It's called Project Status Update and Discussion. And if you've been paying attention, which I know you have, this is starting to feel like a recurring topic, and it's been partially driven this last year by the majority of the ARA having set direction for CARA projects, and then requests coming that fall for funding and partnership that fall outside of that established pathway. It's been discussed at length, voted on at least 3 times, I think, this last year. The results have been consistent, but that notwithstanding, there was some discussion and question about if other projects were to be considered, wanting to do an update on current projects and what sort of funding has been committed or anticipated around those projects, which is a totally fair question. There's 2 things that we think about in terms of forecasting. There is your budgeted amount, that you work for on in this case, a biennium. You have a biennial budget directed at certain projects. That doesn't guarantee that those always happen, but that's on a short-term basis you budget. But within a budgetary period, there's forecasting. And there was a lot of work done with this group on forecasting capacity and potential partnerships or projects. Forecasting means, in this case, you all know that the CARA district is bound by a maximum spending authority. By statute, there's a certain amount of money that can be spent on any projects. And so when we think about forecasting in the context of looking at what's left that can be spent and what projects are remaining, that's the focus that's been adopted as we think about forecasting projects that have been undone on the original project list that was hoped to be, that was hoped for to be accomplished through establishing this TIF district, and what kind of funds remain to address those projects. So that's been the approach. Right now, I'll just do a brief update on projects. I don't think that we need to revisit.
Can I ask a question? I'm under the impression that the thing that's limited is the amount of money we can borrow, not how much money we can spend.
So they're sometimes one and the same and sometimes different. It's actually a really great question. You can only spend and borrow up to $56 million. In some cases, you have non-TIF derived revenue, interest on savings, for example, or maybe you have a property that's worth $1 million and you sell it for $5 million. That balance can be spent, and it would be in addition to the maximum indebtedness, which is the number that you're referring to.
And we have TIF money that comes in.
TIF is directly tied to your spending authority and indebtedness. That's why I say they can sometimes be the same thing. Non-TIF revenue could be spent in addition to your maximum borrowing capacity, which is basically the same as TIF, and it can be derived from different locations. So
I think we need our city attorney to give us some help on this.
I'd be happy to have them review that with you all, if you'd like. You might recall that you don't have to borrow to spend either. You can use direct TIF revenue and expend that, but that still counts against your borrowing capacity because you're borrowing from the public in this case. That's how the LRS definition works for borrowing capacity.
Borrowing, yes. TIF, no.
Okay, well, TIF becomes a mechanism through which you borrow in this case, and that's what I was trying to highlight, but be happy to have Sean come and clarify that if you'd like. So anyhow, with respect to current projects, that was the question and the current status. The waterfront project is very mature, as you know. We're over 90% design completeness on all aspects of it. Yesterday, with the direction of the ARA, we held, well actually, amongst that contracting process with the CMCG contractor to actually see that it gets built, we had a required pre-application call. Was that yesterday? I think it was. It's been a busy few days. Where all applicants who wish to respond to that RFP were there. There was 3 really great locally oriented contractors who were there. We had a great meeting. There was lots of good questions both during and after, and I know our contracting staff is very encouraged by that, as were we. So that's well on its way. Exciting. That closes, by the way, on the 21st of this month, and we'll be the scoring team will work on that the following day. So it's going to be, we're going to get them locked in pretty soon, which is great. Now, you'll recall that project, again, this is rehashing what we've talked about many times, exceeded in design the current spending or planned spending capacity of this district. The idea all along was, we know that addressing the entire waterfront and staying true to the multiple planning efforts and design efforts that have happened over the years will likely exceed remaining spending capacity, borrowing authority, whatever you want to call it in this case. That being said, if it was smarter to design and engineer comprehensively, so in the future, if additional monies get directed at it, it can be built in phases and it works together. And it's not like you're figuring out how to make utilities and infrastructure anytime you want to add to the project, if at all. So that's well on its way. There was some discussion with the council a while ago, given that it can't be built in its entirety, the potential to direct, for example, some streets SDCs at it. The biggest gap at this point is Water Avenue and how much of it gets paved and improved as you move from the bridges to the east. Right now, definitely can do the Plaza style street, the entrance to the park, the new park amenities, those were priorities. as you move further to the east, we'll get the rail crossings done in the intersections, but when it comes to connecting those, there's a gap right now. There's an obvious hole. They're about $500,000 a block. That's just what they cost, and that's probably increasing a little bit as we speak. So there's a hole there. Even with directing available SDCs at it, should the council want to do that, it still creates a hole of unfinished water avenue. So I just want you to be aware of that. When it comes to the St. Francis project, that's on its way, amazingly. We're able to salvage that, and you might recall that Mr. Letman was awarded roughly $750,000 for that project, and another $750,000 to restore the old city hall, which is nearby. They're somewhat interrelated, as you might recall as well, so that's on its way, and those monies are committed. So when it comes to the Wells project, we've of course talked about that at length as well. There was, oh, you know what, I'm sorry, I have a great visual for you. I don't need to explain all this, good gracious. Let me show this to you. Make it a little simpler. Okay. Here's what, when I talked about forecasting and budgeting, here's the currently forecasted numbers, okay? St. Francis, the wells, there'll be some amount of work done to have to resurface and redo drainage on the wells lot to actually increase some parking density there. There's the wells project, which I'm getting to now. There's the remaining obligation for design and engineering on the waterfront, and then there's the capital work for the waterfront project. That totals almost 20 million, and you can see that there's just about 20 million left in spending authority with a small balance. These numbers are the ones that are encumbered that I was just mentioning to you, are committed to projects. So that leaves the Wells Fargo project that you can see here highlighted. Now, we just talked about future for that, and the future is unknown, although it sounds like we're getting closer to a pathway. With a pathway established, you now can go out and we can court potential builders there, developers, of which we've already had a number of people, a couple express interest in it, particularly if it was level, and they could start from the ground up, which is encouraging. That project's not done yet, though, and there isn't a partnership, if any, that needs to happen. The costs of doing land prep are currently unknown, and so I just highlight that for you because it's not happening as was planned, but there's still a project there to happen, and I think it's safe to say there may be a need for some public contribution to make that work. Particularly when you think about a model that is new in the area. This residential density of any kind of significance is somewhat new to the downtown area, particularly at the market rate. So anyhow, I can't predict the future on that, but it's not that there's no project there. That's all I want to say about that. So, some considerations.
Can we go back to that slide, please?
Sure.
So I'm looking at these numbers. In St. Francis, we had tentatively given or allotted, I think it was 2.3 million for Mr. Manley and his group to do the, I think it was 2.3 or 2.3 million for that. Wells Fargo was roughly 2.3, 2.4 million. Waterfront, I don't know, what have we paid for that so far?
Well, construction hasn't started, so
design.
I get you. I'm just going to clarify that I was talking about monies that are encumbered moving forward.
Okay.
And so that's for construction, the 15 million there. The other money that we spent already is already been accounted for in remaining spending authority.
How much was that?
Well, the whole contract was 2.3, I think. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
We've spent close to 2 million.
Okay, so now we spent close to 2 million and we have another 1 million. That puts that at 3.3 million.
But the caveat is there was additional services added that were not part of the original design. So the council went through the process of awarding an additional $750,000 roughly for the construction services, which would have had been done anyhow, but
Just CMG, whatever that.
it's actually, so as a designer of the plans, working with the contractors to make sure it gets built as it's supposed to, that's essentially what it boils down to. So we went through that process with you over this winter, and that extension of the contract was awarded. So again, it's accounted for in the remaining spending authority, and the only outstanding encumbrance is the $1 million that's cited there.
Yes, Councilor Olson.
So what's the grin? And I'm assuming this million goes again to Walker Macy, is that right?
If you're talking about the firm that's been contracted with to do design and engineering, that's correct.
I'm talking about this billion for waterfront design.
That's the remaining amount on the contract that was signed 2 years ago.
So how much are we paying Walker Macy for this whole ball wax?
It's about $3 million, Councilor Olson.
We gave them $2.5 million to start with.
That's a part of it. Their contract was extended for additional services that are needed to do the project, which the
That's
council.
about 600,000. And now is this an additional million we're giving them?
No, this is a part of that. This is a part of what we've already planned on because it's contracted. It's not new money. It's a part of the existing contract. The way I was trying to represent it here for you to see is there's money that's encumbered even though it's not spent yet, but it's encumbered in the existing projects. That's all I was trying to represent for you.
So how much are we contracted with to pay them when we get done with this?
It's $3 million.
I complained about the original amount, and I'm complaining about this, but there's nothing we can do about it at this time, unfortunately. Thank you.
Councilor Kuczynski, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was just saying, Councilor Olson, possibly another term that you could think of it as, the money's already been earmarked for that purpose. It's not, Seth was talking about being encumbered, it's already been earmarked, it's already there, it's already been contracted for.
It's not new, basically, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Mr. Sotomayor and then Mr. Riles. Oh, Mr. Riles.
So the waterfront capital work at $15 million, is that a budget estimate? Is that bid work? And the other question is, I've been involved in a lot of public work over the years. What happens I'm looking at $352,000 balance. What happens when the waterfront capital work goes over by $5 million? Where does that money come from? The reason I ask that question is that over the years, CARA has funded a lot of projects. And one of the cardinal rules and red lines has always been that people come to us with strong budgets and they tell us exactly what it's going to be. And if they have to come back, you don't come back to the trough here. You have to do your due diligence, you have to do your drawings, you have to know exactly what it's going to cost. You need to show us what it's going to be. And so my question is, this waterfront capital work, we haven't even bid this out. We bid it out once, we threw it back, now we're doing a CGMC. We don't know what that number actually is, do we? I mean, that's got to be some placeholder, plus or minus what? I've been in this business too long to think that that's a real number.
Well, it's absolutely a real number when we talk about forecasting, so that's why I addressed it that way. There was talk of, well, how much can we commit to this? This was a number that was agreed upon by the group, or at least thought about in round terms. So clearly, there's not an assumption that, well, that's what we have, and we'll just cover the balance. You might recall one of the benefits of using the CMCG contracting is there's actually max cost that's built into that. So contingency is actually built in, and it's a little bit more efficient, especially in a volatile environment like we're in now. And so that being said, there's actually been very deep looks at cost estimation for this, with the best construction cost estimators that are, floating around the state in the Northwest. It's not a thumb suck. We know that with $15 million about what can be constructed, and so that's why I was noting that even with that amount of 15, for example, we know there's holes in the project. Those holes grow as the cost of construction grow, no doubt about it. And that's typically come in this case in phasing of thinking of shaving off paved blocks of Water Avenue, how to try to balance that. You're absolutely right that at this point, I don't think there's a person in the world that can exactly know what cost will be next summer, but through the CMCG process, it actually provides some security there and safety measures that wouldn't exist otherwise.
That's exactly right. And one of the benefits of the CGMC is that you can, rather than here's what I want done, how much is it going to cost, you can say, this is how much I have to spend, what can I get for it? So it does allow us a unique and often underutilized option for public works to be able to say, okay, here's what we want to spend, here's our budget. Now, you guys design engineering, you value engineering, you come back to us and figure out what we can get for that amount of money. And there may be holes in it, like you said. So that waterfront capital work, $15 million, is discretionary at this point, it's a good estimate. And if I were looking at this overall and I'd say, you're looking at spending $20 million, you have contingency of $352,000, that's like, no way.
Well, that's not a contingency. That's a direct balance if you look at encumbered or earmarked funds versus remaining spending authority. There happens to be a balance there. I would concur that a contingency and building a robust one in to the waterfront is a great idea. And that was one of the recommendations for consideration on the next slide.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's all great. I mean, obviously, I love Albany. I want to see the town develop. I'd like to spend all of this and more. But I don't want to get CARA or ERA stuck in a situation of sort of signing on to a blank check or a black hole. I think we need to be really realistic and say how much we think we can spend and leave a good contingency on the table so we don't just end up. I mean, I guess that's the question. What happens if we get into a project and it blows up and got a hole in the ground? Does the city backfill that? If CARA can't, I mean, where does that money come from?
Well, I think there's a lot of assumptions going into a scenario where that is the result. Ones that are treated pretty closely, you might recall there's been cost estimates at 30, 60, 90%. And through the final leg of this, through 100% design and value engineering with the CMCG contractor, those pitfalls are largely avoided. Notwithstanding, the cost of construction is volatile, and holes will exist relative to the complete design which has been worked on, and that's been a known consideration from day one. That being said, the question that the ARA group put forward for some discussion was, how much room, if any, is there for variation on the current project pathway? And what I'm submitting to you is there's very little, and if there were any, here's considerations to make. The first one, the future of the wells and cost of partnership there is unknown right now. Some funds should be reserved to deal with that unknown if you want to see that project develop in such a way that really benefits in a large way the community. Water Avenue remains incomplete until additional funds are directed at it. Even if estimates are 100% accurate right now, and we can build what's been planned on within that sort of $15 million earmark. There will be holes until other monies are directed at it. And then lastly, the CPI, or cost of doing construction, is increasing for all land projects. And so maybe your point too, Bill. Contingency is important. Of course, we had that built in already within the 15, but more is helpful.
I compliment you moving to the CGMC model because it does give you more flexibility to avoid those kind of cost overruns. It seems like, though we're not, I mean, normally I would see in a CGMC proposal, or maybe it's there, we're just not seeing it, is that you break the project into a number of things, not just one big thing, maybe there's a thing on the end. You see, well, we're going to do this part and this part and this part, and you can give the ARA board the option of prioritizing where they want their money spent versus saying, oh, here's the whole thing and maybe you can't do a little bit. But the CGMC will give you the tools to give them, okay, what's this block cost? What's this piece cost? What's the sewer cost? What's this railroad thing cost? And every project, you always want more than you can afford, whether you're a city or a guy building a house. And so having that CGMC tool, I think, is great, and my hat's off to you for selecting that. I think it gives the board and the ARA board greater tools to be able to manage that whole number. So while looking at that $15 million number is helpful, it doesn't show me what the tools are there to really manage it. I guess we have to wait until we get those numbers back from the contractors.
Yeah, that's partially true. course, the whole thing is broken down into very minute details. There's been significant detail put into that, estimations, cost, and phasing. Finalizing that value for dollar is the job of the CMCG contractor. And of course, that contract was posted publicly and still is right now. You're welcome to review that if you like.
So
Councilor Novak.
Thank you. And forgive me if it is right there and I just don't remember. So are you saying, Seth, that we do have a CMGC that does spell everything out and lay out, this is this portion and it's gonna cost X, and here's this and it's going to cost this, and do we have that? And I just am forgetting?
Yeah, so every element that's been designed and engineered has already been broken down that way for over a year. It's all been done. The task of the CMCG, one of their tasks, is to take very good real life cost estimates. This isn't me going out and going to Home Depot and figuring out what bricks cost. You know, these are professionals doing this. It's to say, based on those estimates and the materials associated, is there some cost savings potentially with material choices? Are there some cost savings by building certain sections together or not? That's where the valuation and the cost savings comes in, and also this cap that's agreed to. It doesn't go over this, so that deals with some of the volatility for us. So there's additional work to be done on how that's broken down, but it's been done in some great detail.
I thought the CMGC was a new process that we just voted on, and I hadn't seen that yet, you know, how it's laid out. I know what Walker Macy presented to us in the past, but I thought when we changed the way this project was going to be done and how it was going to be bid, that we haven't yet seen that information, so forgive me if I...
It's okay, you think of it as a refinement really of the work that's been done. It's a refinement to get us towards a more complete project at a lower cost. That's the purpose of that. And then they actually manage the construction too, which is great.
Thank you, sir. And then just to reiterate, we do have a rock solid cap of 15 million. And so we'll have, the CMGC will say somehow in the contract that, it's like if I do something with a contractor, we've done enough things in my family's business life to know that from now on, we want to get in writing, it will be completed by this day at this amount, and for every day that it's not done by this date, you will pay us. So I just want to know if the same sort of thing would apply here, that if you think in any way that you can exceed this cap, you can't, and if you do, it's going to come out of your back pocket, or somebody else's, not CARA, not the people who live in this. I just want to, you know, so we have that in writing, the CMGC includes something that will keep us from being bitten in the backside down the road financially.
So questions about overruns and contingencies are captured within that. That's the express purpose of this in this sort of volatile environment. However, when we talk about $15 million, that's the round number that this group over the years has thought about directing towards that in consideration of other projects. What I am telling you is, if the ARA wanted to direct more funds at it, there are more projects to be done to make it a more complete project. But that doesn't happen without express direction and guidance from the ARA. It's not like you say, oh my goodness, there's an outstanding bill for $2 million, boy, why did we think of that? That's not what we're talking about.
My point, sir, is if the ARA has said 15 million and not a penny more, and if the ARA directs staff and the CMGC to not exceed that in any way, shape, or form, can we likewise do that?
If that was the direction, of course. It hasn't been at this point.
I have one more question about that previous.
So I have more.
Go ahead.
So when I was elected, I read a lot of minutes, and I read a lot of history of my previous 2 years on city council, and something triggered me just a few minutes ago. I dug up the February 16th ARA minutes. So on your slide, you have 15 million, but on February 16th, we authorized 16.9. Why the difference?
16.9 for
the waterfront project. Resolution is on page 14 of the February 16th packet, and that's why that number 15 million, we're banging on that number, but I recall we voted on 16.9, so why did that change? When we authorized 16.9, we only asked for 15.
I have to go look at that one more time. Of course, I'm not flipping with these funds, and I think it may be relative to total cost estimate at the time. And again, 15 million is the round number that's been used of thinking for several years about what could be committed to this.
But I appreciate that, but the ARA, I don't know if Councilman Chair Johnson was aware of that, but we authorized, or were informed, that we authorized 16.9, but we're seeing this 15.
Yeah, let me look at that one more time, because it may have actually included the Walker Macy contract as well, the additional extension there. That's actually what comes to mind for me, and I've seen a few heads nodding there.
So that wasn't part of the discussion, we authorized 16.9, that's my question.
Mr. Wright.
So one thing that wasn't on there is we own that block, and I believe we paid 1.5 million for the building and the blocks between Barry and the Wells Fargo property in total. And also, do we own the St. Francis now? Is that, so that's what we've agreed to buy it, or?
No,
So that's still hanging out there, right?
no.
All right. Well, set me straight.
Our position on that was to have an option to purchase.
Okay.
The option to purchase became the lever for finding somebody else with the capacity, desire, and ability to redevelop it.
Awesome.
With the assumption that the option would be reassigned once a development partnership with that new purchaser was reached. At the 9th hour, or 11th hour, that potential partner fell apart, unfortunately. So a new buyer was identified in Scott Lemon through this group here to take on that option and purchase the building. The development agreement was a little bit different because we were under constraints for the option expiring, but it's in his ownership, and he started construction and submitted plans for it, so.
So the Wells Fargo property that we do own, and let's say we spend that 2 million, we tear the building down, that theoretically we could sell that half a block for, I mean, it'd be nice to know what a half a block ready to build in downtown Albany costs for his work.
Absolutely.
Because that could be more money we can spend on waterfront or whatever.
That's absolutely right, and I think it's fair to say that in 3 years, there may be some funds to work with that are not planned for right now. I can't predict the future there, but we do know at this point that the waterfront project well exceeds $15 million.
Yeah.
Not because there was some ignorance or on the behalf of anybody. We knew it would exceed funding capacity, even at 20 million roughly. So there's lots of work to be done there, should other funds be directed at it. You're absolutely right.
And as Ray pointed out, the longer we wait, the more it costs.
Yep.
A nice segue into what I'm going to be saying, but if everybody remembers, this whole process started to evolve and we got into phases so that we could allow for contingencies as they were coming down the road. And that's what we're trying to work ourselves through right now as this whole process is so volatile right now. But the way it's working right now seems to be working much, much better than it would have been had we stayed with the original plan. So I'm all in on it.
I'm going to recognize myself for a moment, ask a question, staff. Is there any a sub-discipline of econometrics that could say a certain degree of investment in infrastructure, and in particular what might be called urban renewal or beautification? Is there a general sense of increased tax revenue as a consequence of that? That is home prices going up, other folks with more money moving in, or something like that. Is that at all a plate that we might also consider when we're talking about not so much money to be spent on the project,
But impact of.
Yeah.
Absolutely a discussion for another night. It's a really interesting one that's both obvious and difficult at the same time because of intangibles, how far you look at benefits, impact property values, new investment. It's longitudinal, so you have to look at impact over time. You have to look at counterfactuals, what hasn't happened in the past. There's lots to look at there. course, the general idea is your house is worth more when your street looks nice, and you want to keep your house looking nice when your street looks nice. Anecdotally, there's lots of evidence for this, but again, probably discussion for another evening. Happy to dive into a little bit more.
Councilor Johnson. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I'm kind of confused. We're talking about like 3 or 4 different things here, and so I think we should stick to this. But Commissioner Collins called me yesterday, and he wanted me to make a point, and I agree with him. Says that with not being able to pay the whole thing, that we take it so far and then leave it at that. Don't leave anything like in the middle that's not done, because CARA will be clobbered if we don't finish a part. You know, we can't say, okay, we're gonna go this and this and this, but then we're not gonna pave this, whatever. And so I think it's kind of like we don't want to piecemeal it. We want to go from Monteith Park down, even if it's to the bridges, but just do that with what money we have, and then we look for the money. We don't say, well, we're gonna build the whole thing, and then hopefully we find that pot of gold. So I just want, he called me and he says he really wanted to be here because this is kind of his baby. He was in on the first up CARA and everything, and so he's very aware, but he just, and I agree with him, we just need to do what we can and not overstep what we can do, and like I said, and just dream that it's going to be finished. And I think that's the best way to go. So anyway.
Councilor Smith is sort of wanted to jump in here, and Councilor Smith, I apologize. The hybrid environment here, I didn't really see your name coming up on my screen, so I apologize.
I didn't want to jump in. I've just turned my camera back on after a break.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
Seth, you wanted to respond to that?
Well, maybe it would give you a little bit of comfort, Councilor Johnson. Yeah. You highlighted a great point, and for those who have been not interested in the process, to see an intersection without a paved street connecting another intersection could rightfully be critical. There's a really important complicating factor here, and that is the rail crossings. One of the original purposes of improving Water Avenue. And just very briefly, you might recall that in 2006-07, the ODOT rail said, you can do those crossings, but you got to put automated arms on them. And then we spent a year negotiating that 2 years ago, and they removed that requirement. And we're really close to taking advantage of that opportunity because there's about $500,700,000 saving per intersection of 7 that are being done there for those crossings. And so the design permitting, which is really key here, and taking advantage of that cost savings has to happen sooner than later, or you lose that opportunity, and that would be a major hit to this whole corridor.
And that would be fine, because that's not going to leave, that's going to do the railroad crossing part. It's not going to go down half of the street.
No, it would be the crossing and the intersection, because you have grade differentials that change and drainage, so the intersection itself gets done and the crossing, but then the curb and gutter and paving would need to be paid for in addition.
Okay, that might work, as long as we, like I said, just don't make it look like it's.
No half sidewalks, yeah.
Got it, thanks.
Okay, what's that? Oh, Marilyn, I see your yellow hand up.
Yeah, I do have my hand up this time. I think that some of us are losing sight of how truly complicated the waterfront project is. And because it is so complicated, trying to work around a rail line that's never going to move, it's expensive. And these numbers are big. They've been big all along. Don't see them getting any smaller, but I think that we're talking about a lot of what ifs and wherefores and so on. And I think we just have to accept that this is a very expensive, very complicated project that we have wanted to do since CARA was formed and before. And we need to move forward in whatever way. I can't disagree with Councilor or Commissioner Collins, Advisory Board Member Collins, about doing as much as we can. I don't like to leave holes in things either. At $500,000 a block, that's a big chunk. I don't know what the right answer is, but I remain committed to the waterfront project, but I also there's room in my head to move some pieces around on the board if we don't need to spend as much money on wells as we had committed earlier. I see that as kind of a window with a piggy bank in it. And bank analogy, so that was pretty good. Anyway, I see some possibly some pocket change there that could possibly be repurposed to expand what we're doing. Not necessarily on the waterfront, but for the proposal from Sybaris, which was included in our staff report, that as something that has been requested and could be worthy of additional consideration in some way.
Well, to that point, and with apologies to Mr. Bennett, business from the public is number 4 on our agenda, and we were quickly down to 5 and 6 before I read the sentence. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Was that what this is?
Well, Bill Riles is next, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was the same thing. I wondered what happened. We did get a thing in our packet, and I wondered what happened to business from the public.
He didn't sign up for it.
But he showed up. It just says either send it ahead or show up.
I might say something real quick, just a point of the process. There was something when he asked for business from the public, the chair, he asked if there was anything submitted ahead of time, if there's anybody signed up to speak, which are both good options. And I mentioned that there was one letter submitted ahead of time that was sent out to the CARA board, and that no one was signed up to speak.
I didn't understand that.
I was expecting to address that because I read the letter and I thought we were bringing that back. That Bear had asked for further information and I thought we were getting further information. I thought we were going to address that this evening.
So Mr. Bennett spoke with me and I said, you have a letter that's going to be come up during the meeting, there are minutes from the council.
Get closer to the mic, sorry.
So I advised him that we have a letter, we're going to take another advisement, the ARA is going to talk about it, and if we'd like more information, we'll direct staff to go get that information. He had 3 minutes to speak to us today, he opted to wait until the ARA meets. For us, it's just a different direction. Give staff direction.
So he's going to talk before ARA, not.
No, he's not going to talk for us. We're going to take his letter under advisement and talk about it during the ARA our time. We didn't know what was going to happen here today with this particular.
But he submitted to talk to Karen. I don't.
So we all have a letter, so he spoke to us, right?
I still get something.
Let's not the same as speaking, sir.
Chair, if I might say real quick, I think this might be a product of doing the hybrid situation. Back when we were just doing in person, you would sign up to speak and then that meant you were coming to speak and the chair would recognize you. Since we went to virtual, then we switched to doing, you submit online, and then if you would like to speak as well, you say that you would like to speak as well. Now that we're doing hybrid, there's those 2 options. They're not necessarily the same thing. You don't have to speak in person if you submitted something online, but you're welcome to.
This isn't meant to be bureaucratic loops to jump through. I just remind this group that the ARA met last month and said, we're not considering new projects until we take a look at current ones yet again, which we've done this evening. And so following this meeting, the ARA could have discussion about possibly diverting from the current planned on path, which again has been ratified multiple times, and considering another project if that was the will of this group, which we share, Matt understands that as well, of course, came and chatted with you all last month. So it would be probably getting the cart before the horse to talk about an application or lending before there was an agreement that you wanted to divert funds from existing projects to a new one, which was the purpose of this discussion.
So the ARA don't talk about that at the next meeting.
After this one ends.
Yes.
It's clearer than mud, but not entirely sure. And I would just, my 3 cents were, we're talking about restaurants, and Mr. Bennett had already been part of a plan to create one in what's the Wells Fargo building, has a place, and then the property we are considering or thinking about, rather, we're not buying it, is probably one of the coolest historically significant buildings in the entire city, by far. And there's not a lot of electric railroad stations around. There's probably a couple falling apart on Long Island in New York. So those are some of the criteria for, I think, a whole, a hearing is certainly should be granted. Just because of the history, because of the associations with various aspects of CARA over the years.
You get no qualms about the value of that project from anybody here, I'm sure, right? Staff has been told to pursue certain projects until the ARA decides to do something different. That's the same direction we've given folks for over 2 years now.
So it's on us.
Well, if the CARA members would like to hear a discussion on it, I would feel good about going ahead and doing that now before we end this CARA meeting.
I would be fine with that, since Mr. Bennett is here.
If we're all talking about it, I don't need to discuss it. I trust that ERA will, it came to ERA first, if it wants to go back to ERA. I trust the people on ERA to.
Councilor Smith, go ahead.
Thanks. I would like to hear from the members of the advisory board, their opinions on the direction that the ARA board or the ARA agency has chosen to pursue repeatedly over the year. Are we sticking, do you recommend that the city stick with the waterfront project, the Wells project, and the St. Francis to the exclusion of other work so that the district can wrap up? I really would like to hear that from the advisory board members. That comes up at council or at ARA meetings frequently.
Councilor Smith, do you have a suggestion of how, what that ought to be and when?
What their recommendation should be, or what do they? I guess I'm saying, do they agree with the direction that the ARA has chosen? Those 3 projects. That's it.
Well, we just gave direction to staff to pursue demolition of the Wells Fargo building.
Right.
So we've changed.
Well, but Wells is still, that's still the Wells project. It's just a different coat of paint. It's still the Wells project. It's one of those 3 major projects.
Yeah, Chair.
Councilor
And
Johnson.
Marilyn, I think I understand where you're coming from, because it's kind of like changing horses in the middle of the stream, If we did say, okay, we're gonna let this go ahead and finish out, because if we change, then there's more staff time and whatever, and so, yeah, I see what you mean, and it's very easy to get off track. And so I would say to keep with what we have, and later on, if there's money left over or whatever, but no matter what, to just stop the projects right now, like we did agree to do that. And sometimes we get a little emotional and stuff, and everything looks good, so I think I know what you mean, so I agree with her that we should just do what the ERA board had said and just stop everything, because we turned down Sid Stevens, we turned down Cumberland, you know, whatever, so if we stop it now, maybe it can be finished.
I don't think that's what Marilyn said.
No, it wasn't. Board Member Riles, I was specifically asking for opinions from the advisory board members rather than the ARA as members of the advisory board, the lay members. That there has been concern at council meetings over the last few months that the advisory board was not involved in district decision-making, since their advisory role was limited to recommendations and passed on to the ARA, and then the ARA was in its own role of executing contracts and whatnot. But there remained concerns among members of the council, not in their ARA roles, but in council roles, that the advisory board was not being consulted. So I'd like to get that cleared up and give them the opportunity to express their opinions.
Thank you for that. I do see lots of little yellow hands on the top of my screen here, and I'll just go left to right. If those hands are about addressing what Councilor Smith just noted, please make your comments in this order: Russ Allen, Cy Larson, Councilor Bartholomew, and I believe that's it. Oh, I'm just getting people off the computer here, so thanks. We'll go with live people after that. Okay. Or not live, present people. So,
Thank you.
Just make it warm bodies.
All right, so Russell.
Thank you, Chair. As dead person number one,
I would like to the cemetery right now,
in responding to Councilor Smith's request, I am keeping it succinct. First of all, I love the Cypress project, and I really hope that at some point in time that CARA might be able to participate in making that dream a reality. I also believe that the direction that CARA/ERA has taken is wise, in that we really shouldn't be looking at additional projects until the dust settles on the projects that we already have on the table. I don't mean that as an exclusion of other projects potentially, but again, we have projects that we're trying to work through. I hope that we can kick some money back out of the Wells Fargo budget, for example, but at the moment, I think that we have to keep the door closed until the dust settles on what we've already committed to do. And that hurts because, again, I'm a big supporter of the Sybaris project. And if we open that door, then we're going to be getting requests at every meeting from now until whenever. Thank you.
Silas.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm going to agree with Russ. I mean, I'm reluctant to say that we should stop looking at other projects, but I'm a little concerned that we've already agreed to not hear other projects because we were going to focus on the projects we're working on right now. So I agree that we should stay focused on what we're still working on. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Councilor Bartholomew.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback from the CARA advisory group. I was thinking that since Mr. Bennett was here that he could share information with the CARA board, but if we are continuing with our direction that we need to go, and that's the recommendation of the group and is the direction that we want to continue to go, I would support that as well.
Thanks for your input. I'd like to share with the board just sort of momentarily, and this isn't condemning language by any means, but as I've watched the waterfront project develop from its genesis to now, I'm still waiting for a wow factor. And in my crosser moments, I will say aloud, if there's no wow factor, what's the point? And I think I think that can also be applied, and I'm not making a big push for a Sybaris on Lion Street, but imagining that place in the evening with lights out on a patio, right on Lion Street, the best restaurant in like over 85% of the entire Willamette Valley. That's got to be the best restaurant of that. And so I see a wow in what Mr. Bennett wants to do. But again, that's a very different. That's altogether different from sort of destroying and reconstructing, a subsurface landscape so that we can get a lasting surface landscape along the riverfront. But anyway, that's a rubric. It's not a monetary rubric, but with things like these, if there's a wow factor, it's worth pursuing. So that's that.
I feel it's appropriate for me to recuse myself in this discussion because I've been working with Matt for about 3 or 4 years. We've been before CARA on many occasions, and I'm not an unbiased person in this.
Mr. Settlemeyer.
So a couple of comments. First, we kind of mentioned or talked about this a little bit earlier. If the Wells Fargo is knocked down, we have a lot for shovel ready for some development there. I have a hard time believing that we will be able to develop $2 million for the right to buy that lot. However, there could be some CARA money needed there to make sure that whatever is built there has a cladding and exterior that's compatible with the downtown historic district. So I can see some funding going there. I have a hard time believing that $2 million. Those other kind of proposals on the board, it's really hard to know what kind of numbers like.
I don't mean to interrupt you at all, but there's one other consideration too, thinking about where that money could go. Depending on the priorities of this community and incorporating parking into a new structure, expensive thing to do, and you can see potential for need for a public partnership, if any, on some sort of elevated or underground parking as well, to preserve what's there and even add capacity to, just as an aside. And I couldn't tell you what that looked like at this point.
Right, yeah. So then it comes down to what are the options, what are the benefits are those? Because I know that parking was one of the original town square ideas to start a CARA, which is related to potentially, but not necessarily the same as Wells Fargo in certain regards. So there's that portion of it, and then the other part of it is basically kind of just agreeing with what the chair said, and that is I don't see the well factor in the waterfront. I just don't. Not for that kind of money. And not having detailed numbers for particular portions of the waterfront is hard to go, oh, that's a good idea versus not. I mean, there's certain points, yeah, you do have to do some of it together. Some of that could still be scaled back or scaled down and still be done together. But if you're talking $500,000 to pave one block of Water Street versus, looking at the business in the public, for the Oregon Electric Station, that's also $500,000. I have a hard time believing the value to the community for paving one block of Water Street is going to be higher than what can happen to the Oregon Electric Station. And so for that reason, I'm more interested in scaling back the waterfront a little bit and opening CARA to some small projects. That's my view.
Yes, Councilor Miller.
Thank you, sir. And I want to start by going back to some words you used that I really appreciated, because I think this has been my struggle with the waterfront project ever since I came on the council. The terms you used, sir, wow factor. I have so struggled with that because I don't see it. Outside of the splash pad, which has my great niece and nephew supremely excited, they are wowed by that. And, you know, the possibility of doing something with the stage, okay, maybe, but I'll tell you what, the electric station, that's a historic building in the entry to our city, the entryway to Albany. Mr. Selmeyer, I couldn't put it any better than what you just did. That's a screaming, flaming wow factor. And at the same cost as half a block of the street where there's no wow. And I'm sorry, but I have a hard time to my constituents justifying railroad arms as wow. I can't. It's very, very difficult. And I would prefer to see, to me, CARA is about, Sir, Mr. Sherry, you just reiterated again earlier this meeting, the bottom line purpose of CARA. You know, getting rid of blight and revitalizing historic, if that's not the Sybaris project, I don't know what is. I see so much value in that, and I see a distinct, again, this has been my struggle the whole time. Minus the splash pad and a few things that I can look at that people in my life give me feedback and they say, hey, that's great. I can't, I have a hard time justifying $15 million, and then we also discussed the fact that it would be more than that. And I fear with everything in me, a black hole of money suck, you know? So I will end with that, but I thank you all for your help in finally helping me figure out in my head how to phrase this in a way that I hope my fellow ARA members and CARA board members will understand why I've been toward the waterfront as I have been. Thank you very much.
Councilor Kuczynski.
Just a point of, there are no crossing arms going to be coming up down on the waterfront.
No, but it's part of the project. You're talking about the railroad crossing and.
No.
No?
No. Seth?
I've negotiated crossings, but without the requirement for the very expensive arms that no one cares for. So actually, a significant cost savings over what was originally planned and adopted by council in 2007.
Okay, but I also take issue with the sewer lines. I think that's something that federal infrastructure should be paying for, not CARA.
It's not being paid for by CARA. It's actually been planned for years with the city.
Okay, well, thanks.
It's called our water bill, actually.
Our skyrocketing water bill.
I'm sorry, I did not mean to hijack this or send it sideways. I just saw sort of a coupling of interests and wanted to point them out. Oh, Councilor. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ms. Larson. Your hand's up so steady.
Maybe she just forgot to put it down.
Is your mic working? Yes.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me? Okay. I feel like I need to add to what I said, because I'm very excited at the idea of the electric station being a beautiful restaurant. When I moved here, I loved Sedici's. It's a beautiful building, and I don't want to discount the possibility of the project. However, the city of Albany, anybody who wants to enjoy that does have to have finances available, whereas the waterfront is something that families can do without having to have a certain budget for it. And I feel like that's kind of part of what our responsibility is to help people be able to access the area that we live in. And I've walked down there and it's scary and the boardwalk freaks me out, and there's no wow factor, but it needs to be improved. Even if it's not going to look any different, it's going to lose its value if there's no money put into it. And giving the city a place to gather. I know so many people who live in Albany who go to the farmers market in Corvallis because they like it more. They like how it's on the water, and so there's people in Albany who are leaving to go to the Corvallis waterfront. And I see value in putting our focus back on where it was. Because we've said no to other people because this is what we're working on. And that's where I wanted to, I guess, focus my opinion about it.
No, much appreciated, thank you.
And I'll stop.
Okay, no more hands on my screen here. Let's see. So we're at number 9, adjournment.
No, item 7.
Hmm?
Item 7.
Yours. Oh, item 7. I said I am 7. So staff updates.
Like that way.
Yeah.
No staff updates, Chair, except for me to note that typically, this is from the agency, I think got carried over from the ARA agenda building process.
Okay. Let's see, adjournment. The meeting is adjourned, and I will hit my pen on the table.